Welcome to On Again, Off Again. We're on again.
Welcome to the show. Today we wanted to discuss The Good Place, more specifically Chidi and Eleanor from The Good Place, but I mean we may bring some of the other characters into account. Certainly Simone is worth bringing into the discussion, I would think.
Sure, well, yeah, I mean, and Jason and Janet is an interesting one to kind of pick apart, but for the most part, yeah, it's going to be Chidi and Eleanor that we're focusing on.
Yeah, Jason, Janet, and then by extension Tahani will certainly be the subject of a future discussion.
I think probably one of the most interesting things that we can get into with this story is that the on again, off again aspects of their relationship were not continually having them do something stupid in their relationship. It was the us against the world kind of thing that Mike Schur has explained in several interviews I've seen, that that's just what he likes to see in his characters. And it makes for some really interesting relationships because it makes the challenges seem a little bit more surmountable and less like stupid. I should almost say, I mean, a little more insurmountable, really. Like, that's where the stakes seem to be higher if you're actually pushing it beyond the two of them. Because, you know, you could almost believe that if you were... Well, this is an interesting way to put it in the context of The Good Place. You could almost believe that if you were your best self, that you could get through any relationship. And that's kind of what Chidi and Eleanor eventually end up getting to and working toward, but at the same time, the multiple iterations of their relationship, both romantic and platonic, continually show them balancing out what it is that they need from one another and how they can actually move forward and make each other into the best version of themselves.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. You'll notice that even in episodes where they have a conflict between the two of them, most of the time the conflict is resolved by the end of the episode in some fashion or another. I mean, there's one where Chidi in season 1 just is getting tired of Eleanor always being there, and so she gives him the sign that says, "Fork off, Eleanor." Censoring, of course, is actually part of the show because they are in the good place. They're in a good afterlife, you know. But she hands him the sign and says, "Hold this up if I'm ever being too much for you, and I'll give you your space." And that's, you know, a very... They come to a compromise by the end of the first episode. And yes, very much most of their problems, really, through the course of the show, are external problems that they face together. I note also there's something interesting on Chidi's part, which men be taking notes on something like this. Early on, Chidi decides that he has an obligation to help her, that it's the right thing to do, and then he makes a promise to do so. While that promise is not necessarily romantic at the time, he does make it after they have already been told that they are soulmates. I would say that this is not unlike marriage vows in a way. Because he believes they are soulmates, he promises that he is going to keep her confidence. And then when he finds out that she's not necessarily who he thought she was, which is a common thing, you know, for when people do settle down and get committed into a relationship, he decides nonetheless that he is going to stay with her. I mean, it's no wonder this kid was already basically counseling his parents when they were going through a rough patch. He just has good instincts for making a relationship work, which is funny considering that when he was alive, he never made a relationship work.
Yeah, right. Well, it's interesting. I think you can learn something from their relationship, at least first and foremost in the idea of the opposites attract. And not because of, I mean, I don't know, if you were to really break that down as to why that happens, sometimes it's fulfilling the needs in someone else that you don't have within yourself, or vice versa, that you can, it's kind of that you complete me aspect. But with Eleanor and Chidi, really it seems to be kind of falling into that idea of that power of suggestion. If Michael hadn't brought them together and said, hey, you are soulmates, the thought originally is that they never would have been. Now the 802 reboots that he does actually kind of prove that wrong, because they're not always soulmates. But there is something that always kind of pushes Eleanor over that. But there's also, not in every one of those iterations did they become romantically involved. They just found each other. And I think probably you can see that from the, what is it, season 3 when they're in Australia? Yeah. And Chidi says at one point in the afterlife, if only we could have met the way people normally meet at a philosophy lecture, or you had come to me in one of my offices asking me questions about philosophy, and Eleanor starts laughing like, is that how you think people meet each other? And excuse me. What that means in the context of what actually happens when she does eventually come and show up and have questions about philosophy one day in his office. That experience that they go through, they spend a full year and they never get together. Chidi's with Simone at that time. And yet they do still have this friendship relationship based on their mutual respect for each other, basically. And that's kind of interesting. I mean, it lends itself to the question of whether soulmates can be soulmates just on a platonic level. The show says that, soulmates aren't born, they're made. And sure, fine, that's fair. But that means that to make a soulmate doesn't necessarily have to be this romantic relationship, and that there is something deeper within what's going on there. And you could almost say that any one of these groupings of just even the 4 humans is a soulmate relationship, that they all have to work continually to, despite their differences, work toward the betterment of each other.
What you were saying about a soulmate relationship doesn't necessarily need to be romantic. I think the show kind of has fun with that a little bit in season 2 when Michael's coming by with all of Eleanor's potential soulmates. And it's like, one of them's Tahani, one of them's a Labrador Retriever, and the explanation that a soulmate isn't necessarily something romantic, but could be your best buddy, so to speak. And I would say that that's very much true. In the cases of people I know who never got married or never settled down with anybody romantically in any capacity, the ones who seemed the happiest were the ones who had a best friend of some kind, a best buddy with whom they spent all their time. And sometimes that's even a member of their own family, a la Tahani and Camilla, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And other times that's... that can be even pets or something like that, can kind of fill that role, I guess. But one thing that you were saying that kind of made me think is when you were talking about how opposites attract. Now, it's important to note what kind of opposites attract, because Eleanor and Chidi complete each other. Chidi is always thinking about the ethics of everything and therefore can't come to a decision. Eleanor is very decisive. She sees a problem, or what she perceives as a problem, sees a possible solution to the problem, and then just takes it, doesn't think about it. They kind of need each other to balance out, where Chidi would stop and say, okay, well, think about the ethics of this, and then it kind of curbs some of Eleanor's kind of more destructive or selfish tendencies, and then in turn, Eleanor's decisiveness turns around and helps Chidi because he can't ever come to a decision. You present 2 hats to him or 2 puppies, and he's broken. Now, interestingly, we get another instance of opposites attracting in Jason and Tahani hooking up. Now, there's something that Jason very specifically says during their relationship that I think defines an example of when opposites don't attract, where he says, well, Tahani, I'm super nice to you, but you're not very nice to me, and I can't put my finger on it, but I think something's wrong about that. It's something to be careful of when we say opposites attract, and when we think of this idea that they need to be opposites that complement each other, that weave into each other. If you have one person in a couple who is compulsively late and the other one who is compulsively early, between the two of them, they might actually end up on time. That sort of balance.
I think it's even more within the confines of any relationship where you have to consider what is going to be complementary. Sometimes that's polar opposites in a magnetic fit. Sometimes it's more like a puzzle piece locking together, that there are as if three sides of this piece are not going to work, but one of them will, and you've got to figure out as to which one it's going to be. Jason and Tahani kind of do make things work for a period of time, and they're actually not even really that worried about it until they find out that Janet is. And where they realize, like, okay, well, we were just kind of messing around with each other, like, this is not that big of a deal, kind of thing. And so I think that where you can find the strength in any of these relationships really breaking down their strengths in spite of weakness is ironically more when they're in the season on Earth than when they are in the afterlife, because I don't know, I just find something really fascinating about the platonic aspect of Chidi and Eleanor's relationship when she eventually explains to him, like, look, I was, I had this private tutor and now I'm here doing Tai Chi with a bunch of farting housewives, and it's just everything slowed down for her. It wasn't just that the learning of philosophy was slowed, it's that her interaction with Chidi was divided, and her ability to connect with him over the things that he was passionate about and that she comes to find that she is passionate about, that those kinds of things, if you're not given the opportunity to actually meet someone at the level of puzzle piece matching moment, then 75% of the time you're going to think, what am I even doing with this person? And I think you can see that in several iterations of the afterlife. There's a moment when Chidi's flipping around through all of his different experiences, and they do this one kind of smash cut where he's like, I don't even understand what I did to deserve you, and it's like this goes from this fight to this moment of them laying in bed together, and it's like, I think you can take that part of Eleanor that frankly would hook up with anybody and that part of Chidi that wouldn't hook up with anybody if it wasn't right. And you can watch them have to explain that position to one another, where for what is it? I think Chidi's girlfriend gives him a quote from Kant where it's reason is and ought to be only a slave to the passions. And that's something that I think Eleanor has never used reason. She's always just, her reason is a slave to her passions 100%. And the irony of that is, if that is a Kant quote, for Chidi to be so into Kant and not understand the meaning of that and actually reconcile the larger implications of what that quote is saying, then he does need someone to pull him through and make him the better version of himself. And that might be Simone. That might be Eleanor. That might be Michael. That he has several people in his life who eventually come in and are like, look, dude, live your life. Like, it shouldn't be this hard. It's not this hard. And it's not until the very end where he actually can become satisfied with the actions that he takes, where he eventually overhears Janet explaining to Jason, like, look, we should just call it what it is, kind of thing. And I'm not gonna act as if this isn't what it is or use excuses. And he likes saying that your brain is like a fork in a garbage disposal, kind of. There's always some sort of further justification that he's taking on a philosophical level to push down where his passions actually are. And Eleanor has to find herself somehow on a philosophical level raising her level of rationale, because I don't know. I mean, while a very resourceful individual, Eleanor has had to, I mean, they make it pretty clear she was just one of those that was dealt a bad hand and had to react to it. But I think there's something to be said for the character that lies within any of us, that little voice in our head, or the what do we owe to each other, or those kinds of baseline humanity things that should allow us to actually grow on that. And I think the point of the show, and what might be a fair thing to say in any relationship, especially a romantic one, is that if you don't have someone there helping you along to be better, how could you be, or why should you be?
Yeah, and I was going to ask probably why it was that Chidi and Eleanor work out, but Chidi and Simone definitely don't, even though they have the whole Chidi being told that they're soulmates thing going on when they're together in the afterlife and everything. But I think you already gave that answer, and that's that Chidi had trouble letting his passions have any say in what he was doing. It was always reason, and if you come down to reason, then ultimately either you end up with an infinite number of possible things that could be the reasonable thing to do, or you end up with something that's just reason without passion, and it can be pretty cold and unfeeling. If we look at the way that Simone and Chidi broke up, it was pretty clear that a lot of it came from the fact that they were both too logical, too much into reason to really make it work. Both of them kind of have this "oh how romantic" statement in their final episode as a couple, and that really does seem to be at the heart of why it doesn't work. And even when they're still alive and he breaks up with her, she laughs about it and says, "You are so weird." Yeah, and she's totally relieved because she knows that it doesn't really work. I mean, if there were any kind of passions really in that relationship, just whether or not she thought, yeah, maybe we should break up, then when he said it, it still would have hurt, at least just a little. Would have at least make her catch her breath or something like that. But she laughs it off like it's nothing, really, which tells you just that it lacks passion.
I can go here because we're talking about The Good Place, but the word passion comes from passio, which means to suffer. Chidi and Simone are not suffering for one another. Chidi and Eleanor suffer for each other the whole time. And I think there's something to be said for, I don't know, not suffering in pain, because I don't think relationships have to be painful to be passionate. But they do have to, if I could say, long suffering being the greater idea in there of patience, that patience is the true passion, that if you're willing to be there, stick with it, move through it, watch it change it, that's the kind of thing that you invest time in and energy, and that's passion. That's long suffering. That's something that is true love. That if you're willing to give and give and give, then why not gain from it? And if you give and give and give and never gain, then obviously the other person's not giving. And that's where you have to be willing to work with the other person and say, what the hell is going on here? And I think that's kind of what Chidi and Simone eventually do. Is like, okay, they just kind of come to this edge of, what are we even doing? And Chidi and Eleanor reached that point several times. But I think eventually they come down to, it's kind of like the summation of each of the characters eventually get to the point where Michael said that that got them into the good place, kind of thing. Tahani's altruism actually starts helping people. Jason ends up spending however many Baramies just meditating and yeah, exactly, just thinking about the expanse of the universe, and Chidi answers life's biggest questions and develops an entirely new afterlife, and Eleanor gets innocent people off of death row. She ends up saving not only humanity in what she's done, but like specifically Mindy St. Clair and Michael, and gets them to really fulfill what their greater callings were. And I think that that's something that where they're benefiting themselves, they're benefiting one another, and they're benefiting mankind to eventually work to this position of seeing what kind of push and pull you can gain in, I don't know, just self-improvement for the sake of someone else's improvement. It's kind of like, if you can look at yourself and change with the intention that it's going to change someone else's life for the better, then that's just like a 2-for-1 bonus deal. If you're like, no selfish act is self-improvement. It's just not. And so if you have that sort of deference to somebody else, then however many if it takes 800 iterations of the millions of experiments, even those designed to torture you, that sort of passion and that long suffering and the love and care that you can develop for somebody, knowing that, if you go way back to the beginning, Chidi's the one who makes the first efforts towards self-sacrifice, because of course Eleanor's biggest problem is her selfishness. But when she is acting selfishly, she eventually realizes, it's kind of like, I don't think on Earth she ever really had to live with the fact that she was torturing good people. You see that the people she surrounds herself and that surround themselves around her are not good people. And so if they suffer in any way, it might even be one of those where she could believe that they deserved it. And so if you get to a position where somebody is just willing to be as good as Chidi is willing to be and as self-sacrificial for the sake of her being able to stay in the afterlife, eventually that rubs off. And you kind of think, oh my gosh, well, this person's, sacrificing their life for me. And, you actually kind of start to notice something in that. And if you are in a relationship able to, if the other person is being completely selfish and you just keep being self-sacrificing, that might rub off a lot more than reacting in selfishness, because then you both just grow apart and end up breaking up, doing your thing, whatever, like you might as well go off and just try it again with somebody new, right? But and that's where a lot of people end up, where it's like, no, you could create this person to be your soulmate if you were willing to understand that it's not your soul that you're mating with. It's not up to you. It's not a personal thing that you have to try and be the best you, independent of these other human beings that are around. Let these other human beings change you into the better version of you.
And certainly don't be afraid to sometimes listen to maybe a friend that you don't think knows anything. I mean, the number of times that Jason Mendoza has the answer. When Chidi goes through his nihilistic phase, Jason shows him a special Jacksonville-style pool where you make your own points. And that's the thing about nihilism. I don't know how many people caught this, but in nihilism, it posits that there is no point to the universe or to life, and therefore you make your own point. And that's kind of what Jason, I think, is playing on in that moment. He had the answer. And then when Chidi first really meets Jason and finds out that he's not Jean Yu the monk, very first thing he says is, I feel like we're on a prank show. And he was right in a weird sort of roundabout way. Now, it's interesting also that you pointed out that in Eleanor's relationships, she surrounds herself with people who are not good people. In some cases, just as awful as she is, in some cases, quite a bit worse than she is, and therefore it doesn't really matter if her selfishness causes them to suffer, because they kind of had it coming. Now, what's interesting about that is she's essentially in a bad place in her life before she enters the afterlife, a bad place where everybody tortures each other. And then when she dies, she goes to a bad place where people are used to torture each other. Now, of course, it ends up different because now Chidi's there and she had been told it was a good place. And I feel like that combination of having the right people together who can kind of play off of each other and help improve each other, plus also just the idea of being told this is a good place, kind of helps to start building change in that direction. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up, typically we like to ask the question, was this couple doomed from the start, or could they have made it work out? Now, in this particular case, though, Chidi and Eleanor definitely work out. Now, I will say I think that Simone and Chidi were probably doomed from the start for a large number of reasons, but Chidi and Eleanor, let's reverse the question a bit. Were they destined to work from the start, or did they really just have to work at it? Now, I'm tempted to say that they really did just have to work at it, because we do see them working at their relationship, but at the same time, they kept coming together and kept getting into relationships, not every single time, but over and over and over again, to the point where Mindy St. Clair started filming them. Yeah. That's dirty. But that, nonetheless illustrates the argument that could be made for how they really were meant to be together in a weird roundabout way. Like you said, they all kind of become the thing that they were told they were to get into the good place, with Tahani and Jason, Chidi, and Eleanor all becoming what Michael said they were at the beginning. What if then they became soulmates?
Well, yeah, and it's a good question because you almost have to ask yourself on this question of soulmates, are they made or were they not? I mean, what is the show actually telling us? Because then you would have to believe that there was some point at which they didn't work. You know, it's like they've given us the multiverse theory in this, right? That somewhere, somehow, some Chidi and some Eleanor made some decision that made them not be themselves. Which sorry, I'm just going through some of the philosophy of the show, like the bundle theory of the self, baby. You know, I mean that's the idea is that you are only you as much as you actually remember these collective selves that you have been. You know, any time one of them is differentiated from you, that's not bundled into yourself, and therefore is not actually the you that is making decisions now. And so it's kind of like any one Chidi with one iteration off would have ended up with Simone or Tahani or, you know, Jason. You know, like, I don't know, who knows? It could have just would have been, yeah, or the Labrador Retriever. It's right. Or what's the creepy raven lady? The I can't remember what her name is. Esmeralda, I think, something like that. You know, but I think that running back through all those iterations, Eleanor does at one point ask Michael if in any of the reboots she asked Chidi for help and he said no. And Michael said, nope, he always helped. You asked and he was there for you. And I mean, we've talked about quite a bit this idea that, yeah, some relationships could have worked if they changed everything fundamentally about themselves. Apparently, Chidi is at a position where he would almost be able to make any relationship work.
If he let his passions be part of the relationship and stopped rationalizing it.
Exactly, because his real life girlfriend that we see actually explains that much to him. Like, it's not as if Chidi can't get a girlfriend. It's that he can't keep one because because she says to him, we're not a book group. He's like, well, we're not a book group. You know, and no one wants to hear that. And so it's, yeah, it comes down, I think, to one, the forced confines of Chidi and Eleanor's relationship, kind of,
which she compares to reality TV shows. Take two attractive people and force them to stay in close proximity to each other. Something's bound to happen.
Which may not be untrue. I don't know. Like, it's, again, it comes down to that power of suggestion kind of thing. That hey, why not? And yet that doesn't make for an eternity with somebody. The hey, why not is a Tahani Jason relationship. Chidi and Eleanor obviously have something deeper going on. And I don't know. I think what's interesting to see is if Eleanor at her worst could be with Chidi at his worst. Because Chidi at his worst is taking 30 minutes to decide what bar they should go to and gets pummeled by the air conditioner that he was fussing with because he couldn't make a decision. Eleanor at her worst might be the dress bench. Yeah, there you go. Both of them might be at their worst on Earth. I mean, in their first chance at it, has just not been good. And that both of them, to show up then in the afterlife, you almost have to ask if, let's say the stakes weren't that if Chidi doesn't help Eleanor, then Eleanor doesn't get to stay in the afterlife. Those are the initial stakes. Those are where Chidi knows that his decision to not help her would damn her for eternity. And Eleanor knows that her decision not to listen or interact with Chidi in a positive way would damn her for eternity. Now, the interesting metaphysical, broader implications of interpreting that metaphor tend to be, look, if you're not willing to play nice with people, are you not just basically creating your own personal hell?
You create a bad place out of your life. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that Eleanor and Chidi, had they just been put in a medium place, told that, hey, you're soulmates, and they had to spend the rest of the time thinking, really? That, I don't know. It's kind of hard to say whether with a motivation to help her, if Chidi would eventually find that motivation, and without a motivation to listen to him, if Eleanor ever would have found that motivation.
Well, I mean, I think she makes a couple comments such that Chidi is someone she never would have listened to on Earth, and we generally understand Earth and our mortal lives as more or less a medium place. I mean, granted, people with depression might disagree with that, and super optimistic people might also disagree with that and say, what are you talking about? This is the great place. And shut up, Glenn. But yeah, that on Earth she never really would have listened to him without what we see eventually with the nudging from the bartender, where with Michael kind of intervening and giving her specific words to look into, and also giving her a near-death experience. And that is part of the idea here is the stakes, really. The stakes need to come into question. What are we risking by doing things the way we're doing? When she had the near-death experience where the carts were rolling toward her and then Michael pulls her away from the carts, she was forced to stop and take a look at the kind of life that she was living and what would be the implications of such a life were she to die. I mean, even aside from afterlife, because I don't think she really talks about the afterlife during that part, but it comes down to, you had something precious. Life is precious, and we can measure that not just in terms of our moral understanding of life being precious, but gold and diamonds and silver exist elsewhere in the universe, and we call those precious because of how rare they are. How much more for life, which as far as we can tell doesn't exist anywhere else in the universe. And if it does, it's so far away as to make it far more rare than gold, silver, or diamonds. She had this precious thing, and she stopped and really took a look at what she was doing with it and how she was going to be remembered. And I think that in the light of that, both in terms of how that sort of thing should act as a motivation for people to behave better in general. But certainly also that kind of thing can come into play in a relationship. I mean, when you're in a relationship with someone, think about, if they ask you for help in anything, think about what could be the consequences of not stepping in to help them. And of course, like Chidi, be sure to weigh out the ethics and the morals by helping this person. Are you hurting someone else and all that sort of thing? But of course, unlike Chidi, don't get completely paralyzed by that. I think someone I knew in the military said that that's called analysis paralysis. And I think that's a great term for it and easy to remember.
Well, and it's interesting because if if you go back to one of the greater questions of the show, when they keep returning to different points of philosophy to discuss, especially that moment with Michael in the bar, the specific words that he gives to Eleanor are, "What do we owe to each other?" And Chidi, in the little clip of his lecture on that subject that we see, says that the reason we act the way we do and orient ourselves in the world the way that we should is because of our relationships with other people. And there are billions of ways that you can view life and your place in it as being ultimately self-centered. That, basically when Eleanor first has her near-death experience, her reaction is, I think I'm kind of a monster. And does start to view life as a rarity and something invaluable and that is greater than what she considered it to be at any point previously. But it starts to fade after a little while, and that's when Michael has to step in and give her that kind of boost to show her that, yeah, you can work for the environment and try to make the world a safer, healthier place for people. That's fine, good. It's a noble endeavor. But you are going to get burnt out if you're working unilaterally for these, like along with people who you maybe don't actually have a personal relationship with and are working toward the intention of some great question of the universe, i.e. saving the planet. There's something a little too disconnected about that what Eleanor realizes in that year is that she comes down to it and she really hasn't had any new relationships, and nothing really motivates her to continue in that because her friendships are not any better, her personal life is not any better, her job situation is not any better. In fact, all of it's a little bit worse. And it comes down to this, like, why is this even worth it? And eventually, when with a little push from Michael and a little intention on her part to actually end up getting up and going to Australia just to show up at this guy's office, that's when she starts finding a relationship and finding a purpose and starts building in. So when we ask ourselves, what do we owe to each other? It's, you're never going to be able to answer that question if you don't have an other. If you're just asking, what do I owe? To what? The universe? You don't owe the universe anything. And the universe doesn't owe you anything, So it's kind of this question of like, okay, well, what am I here and what am I doing? Well, you're not the only one asking that question. What is that person here and what are they doing? And when you ask yourselves, should we be asking each other like, hey, we're both here. Should we be doing something? Should we be doing this thing together? Maybe we, and then you actually start working toward a goal and working toward something that's actually meaningful, and you find yourself with a place in the universe. And it's not about what you owe to life. It's that you live your life with another and find that the only thing that you owe to them and that they owe to you is the ability to live that life and to do so with the least detriment possible to you or to the other. And that, existence as if I can, I don't know. I mean, poke at Buddhism a little bit. It's like, what's the point if all you're doing is shirking relationships and bodily needs and humanitarian efforts to have some sort of oneness with the universe? You have to ask yourself, what do you owe to other people at that point? What good have you really put into the universe by sitting quietly and contemplating basically nothing? Like, if it doesn't come down to something that actually exports benefit from the self to the other, what the fork are you doing here?
Yeah, which is part of why I think, in a weird way, Jason really understood things a lot better than we think he did sometimes. He showed so much loyalty to Pillboy and to his dance crew, most of the time to Donkey Doug as well, although he and Donkey Doug, a.k.a. his dad, got at odds with each other. But Jason understood the idea of just being nice to people and having loyalty to them and working towards something together. And he didn't understand it in his brain. He didn't understand very much in his brain, but he understood it in his gut. And with Tahani, I mean, she saved all those people and helped all those people with charity and everything. But we don't really see her come into her own in the good place until after she reconciles her relationship with Camilla to the best of her ability. And then her bliss, her moment of bliss, is when then both of them reconcile with their parents. Chidi and Eleanor don't really reach the good place until they've come together as a couple and have really proven through thick and thin that they will stick it out no matter how hard it gets. It's and that's very much what it comes down to. I mean, there's general goodness, just generally being good to people is all well and fine, but it's not going to satisfy the way being good with other people that you care about will. It just won't. And that's ultimately what Eleanor needed, was to go and find other people who were a good influence on her. Because when she was with the environmentalist group, I mean, who did she have there? You know, she had that guy who she referred to as Hot Oliver Twist or something like that. The tall, scrawny guy.
You want to feed him soup.
Yeah, want to feed him soup, she says, yeah. And it's, if I remember right, it's the same guy who, on the day she died, she threw a cup on the ground and he asked her, "Why are you like this?" And she went off on him. So clearly there's not a very positive relationship there. She needs a buddy, a friend, someone who's working towards this with her. And so I guess I would say, if you're somebody who wants to do good in the world but hasn't really maintained relationships, whether friendships or romantic relationships or family relationships, I would say definitely reconsider that position. Maybe seek out some people who have the same ideas of what's good as you do, or similar ideas, or maybe even totally different ideas in some cases, because maybe your ideas do need to be challenged. Maybe you can find a better way to do things, and maybe you'll all work together towards a common good, like Chidi and Eleanor, and like all four of the humans in The Good Place.
Absolutely. And I think you can see that even in some of the finales of each of their stories, because Chidi says the point at which he felt the most peace was they went out to dinner with their parents, and Chidi's mom gave Eleanor a kiss on the cheek and left lipstick behind, and Eleanor's mom rubbed it off. And he said, I don't know why that was the moment, but it was. And it's like, because that's the sweetest relationship you can get is just like the mothers of two people in love loving them too in just this sweet, quiet, gentle way. And you can see that it's the good place because friends.
The reason is friends.
Yeah, the reason is friends, and it's you can find that in each of their stories that when even Eleanor, when she comes to Mindy St. Clair, is like, look, you think you're better off, but if you're anything like me, and I think you are, you will benefit from having other people in your life. And it's like you can spend your whole life fighting to be alone. And you can do so because you've spent a decent portion of every moment before then being hurt by other people. But you have to ask yourself whether the isolation is ever actually better than just trying again with a different person and a different version of you. And seeing if somehow, with different circumstances, in a torture chamber with just enough good to make you not realize that it's a torture chamber, that if in this medium place, in this Cincinnati, if you can make yourself the best version of you in order to interact with somebody else who's doing the same thing, and maybe watch what happens and see if you benefit, see if they benefit, and if it's worth it. And I think it is. I think every time it will be. So I don't know. It may not be within everybody's capacity to make wherever you are your own personal good place. But you're far closer to that potential if you have someone else to do it with.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of very powerful points. I don't think there's a better note to end it on except maybe to say, take it sleazy.
Aww. You got to say it. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. Yes.
Well, anyway, we are on again, off again.
And we're off again.